and welcome to Macros with Maithili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. This week we are extremely privileged to have with us Mukesh Aghi, the President of the US-India Business Council in Washington, who's going to help us through, join the dots and take a hard look at all the issues in the Indo-US business relationship. What is the state of the global economy? Has the perception of India changed? A whole host of other issues. Thank you so much, Mukesh, for joining us in this edition of Macros with Maithili. Let me start by asking you, for the benefit of our viewers, can you just explain a little bit about what exactly does the US IBC do? What has been its role over the past many years? And do you see the role changing in the President Trump's administration?
Well, US IBC is the largest bilateral agency in Washington, D.C. This was set up in 1975 by the two governments, and its role is to drive strong commercial partnership between the two countries. Now, as time has gone by, our mission has evolved beyond commercial. It's gone to strategic, it has gone to cultural, and I would say to a certain extent spiritual also. And so we tend to focus a lot in every aspect of this relationship. We tend to play a little more stronger role, providing policy guidelines, strategic guidelines to this administration. And we also work very closely with Government of India to basically support some of the issues between the two countries. So I think our role has become much more enhanced as Trump administration is trying to settle down and build its team also.
So has the world view of India, particularly the US view of India, changed post demonetization, and now the very fact that GST is almost here on the cards? The government has taken a whole host of reforms. Has the view of the US administration in particular changed about the Indian economy and the Indian government, the Indian people?
Dramatically, and I'll tell you why. One is the message which the Modi government has sent to the US is willing to make bold decisions. Demonetization was a risky move. It was a bold move. If you look at GST, complex, but if we're able to get consensus on all parties and take that forward. I think the sentiment in the US is that you'll see stability in India long term, because they're expecting Modi to win 2019 election. So what we are seeing is more interest coming in from the pension funds and long-term investors looking at infrastructure investment in India. So we see a much more deeper interest, much more longer interest taking place in the US about India.
Yes, I know that's true, but as far as President Trump's own views are concerned, it may be a little difficult to kind of effect that change. But surely it is possible to work through his officials, through the politicians, through the US Congress, the House of Representatives, to ensure that the right view of India does get across.
I think you have to understand, for US government, India is not what I call a problem child. And so because there are no issues there, it does not come in the priority list. Okay. And so I think from that perspective, and there's an issue of bandwidth also in this government. So I think India stays below the radar, and I think only time it comes up when we try to push the agenda forward.
India's strength does lie in export of services, and here one of the major sticking points, at least in recent times, has been the way the Trump administration seems so serious about clamping down on H-1B visas, and this has already begun to tell on the bottom lines of Indian IT companies. Do you see any way out of this, or is H-1B not such a serious issue at all? What can Indian companies do? What can the Indian government do? What can you sitting in Washington do to ensure that this does not become a huge problem in our bilateral relations?
Well, first is H-1B, it should not be a pivotal issue between the two countries. Okay. So it should not be a thorn in the relationship. That's number one. Two is if you look at, 85,000 visa given, 65,000 to workers coming in, a very small percentage of that goes to Indian IT companies itself. And that's a very small number itself. So I don't think on the executive order which was given by the Trump administration, it has much of an impact. I think it's all about compliance, holding the rule of the law. And we have to agree that while some companies have respected and have followed compliance, some have abused it also. And I think we have to understand this is not a trade issue, this is an immigration issue. And what we are doing at USIBC is we are trying to encourage, from the support of membership, that H-1B is good for the American business. It makes them much more competitive. It makes them much more efficient. And so we should, push that agenda. In fact, we are saying that 20,000 H-1B visa issued to the student graduate, we should take that to 50,000, because we have roughly 160,000 plus Indian students studying in America, giving roughly $9 billion in tuition fee, subsidizing local students. And I think they should be given a priority as time goes on. So I don't think this should be considered a pivotal issue between the two countries. Indian companies are smart enough to adjust to the changing environment, and I think they have to also reinvent as time changes, as technology changes. So my opinion is that the impact on Indian companies will be very, very minimal as you look at the current state of H-1B visa issue. You got to understand the changing business operating environment, changing technology, the automation. So I don't think that has a bigger impact. I think all these companies, if you talk to Infosys or to TCS or to Wipro, they have a big pipeline of open jobs which they can't fulfill in the US. So the issue is supply, not demand itself.
Does the US economy, is it able to provide the skills? Because ultimately the fact is that the US really doesn't have the skills that these companies are looking for. The US labor market is not able to provide the kind of skills, and ultimately they will have to look to India and to Indian companies to provide these skills.
There's a lack of skills, there's a lack of supply, and if this administration will push GDP growth to 3%, it'll need more workers. And where do those workers come in? Obviously from India or other geographies, but India has an abundant supply of talent. So I don't think that issue of supply and demand is going to go away. But the more important is, I think it is not going to be a pivotal issue between two countries on H-1B.
Between India and China, the fact is, the unfortunate fact really is that India never really gets the visibility within the US administration that China gets, despite the fact that we should be natural allies. Do you see that changing in the Trump administration? Because initially Trump did start off by saying that he's going to name China as a currency manipulator, he's going to impose a 40% tax on their imports, but subsequently we saw at the first meeting of the two heads, the President Trump adopted a much more conciliatory tone vis-a-vis China. Why is it that we're not able to make the US look at India more seriously?
Well, I think you have to look at, one is a hard power, China. India is seen as a soft power. One is seen as threatening, the other one is seen as a partner and a friend. And I think if you look at the relationship between India and the US, is very different. It is cooperative, it's a partnership. It is, if you look at last year, US-India conducted more joint exercises together than any other country together. So I think that relationship is moving in the right direction. I think China is seen as a threat, both from a business community perspective, because if you look at companies like Google, Uber, Amazon, they can't operate in China. But in India, they have majority of the market share. China has become a competition, so that's where the whole attention goes into. A competition in a threatening manner, whereas India is not seen as a threat. It's seen as a partner, a friend. And you have to understand, if you look at within the administration also, a large number of Indians who are operating within the administration. If you look in the Congress, now we have 5 congressmen who are of Indian origin itself. So what we're seeing is a soft power building up within the US of the Indian community also. India's story is a growth story. Last year, India became #1 destination of FDI. If you look at the first quarter, the number is up by 38%. So we believe that India's story may not be making that loud noise, but it seems to be moving in the positive direction. And US companies are gaining market share. They're employing more people in India, they're investing more in India, and they're getting right ROI. There's no RBI regulation, they can't take their profit out, unlike China. So I think India's story is in the right direction.
You've talked about the number of reasons why, in fact, it's not so easy to do business in China. At the same time, the fact remains that India is seen as a much more difficult place for US companies also to do business in India. And in fact, in the ease of doing business, we are somewhere way below. So why is it that despite all that you've said about how difficult it is in practice for companies like Google and Uber, Amazon to do business in India, we are still not seen as more business friendly than China?
I think there are two factors. One is perception management. We got to change the perception. And also I think there is a certain factor like ease of doing businesses in India is still not to the world class, in the sense is we need to make things much simpler. And I think this government is making all its effort, and what we are seeing is things are improving on an annual basis. And what we are seeing when we talk to member companies, they're able to move things much faster, getting a license or approval. So I think things are getting better. And what we see, the message we get from government in India towards a member company is it will get more better as time goes by. If you look at the recent issue of price control on stents, we agree that you need to have medicine and devices available at a cheaper cost. But you can't take one principle and think all stents are one. Stents are different categories. And you can't put one price. And so that's where they were unhappy. I think on the copyright IPR, they're happy that things are moving in the right direction. They can move much faster. So I think those are the things which do send I would say, a message which may not be right to the investment aspect of US companies.
Another contentious point in our bilateral relationship is the India issue of IPRs, and you mentioned it yourself. But the fact is that our patent laws have been repealed. We have new patent laws in place which is entirely TRIPS compliant, and the government has to keep in mind that we do need to make drugs affordable to our people. So why is it that this is such a big issue, and why are US companies determined to try and put pressure on the Indian government to roll back these laws?
Well, I think that's where exactly a year ago, India announces IPR policy. What India needs to do is, do a road show. Take people through the whole IPR policy. That has not been done. I believe you got to educate people to partner better with those people itself. And I think we're working with Government of India, DIPP, to ensure that at least those road shows take place, consultation happens, they understand India's position. I think that's what's lacking. We're not arguing about the IPR policy. I think it's about trying to communicate and change their perception. That's important at this stage. India has made dramatic improvement. It has never, in the last 2 years, this government has not appealed the court ruling against them on some of these issues. So it seems to respect global IPR. It seems to, and our member companies are quite happy about that. I think there are certain issues, technical issues, which needs to be addressed. Or if nothing else, once the new administration comes in on the USTR, to make sure that they agree, disagree. And until that happens, I think this issue will keep on percolating. So I think my opinion is India just need to discuss and tell its story a little better.
The US has been disengaging from multilateral fora, whether it is WTO or climate change. But is bilateralism the way to go for India vis-a-vis the US? Because the fact is that India has always put much greater store by multilateralism, and vis-a-vis the US, bilateralism cannot get us very far.
I think so. I think with this administration, bilateral will work. It's just a matter of agreeing, disagreeing early on what are the big issues and driving that relationship forward. I think if you look at we talk about H1B, I think you can push that through a services agreement on bilateral. 2025, India's economy multi-trillion, and if a large portion of the economy is a trade between two democracy, I think it's a win-win. I think India will still be a very strong services export economy, and I think that's where bilateral has to come in and play a role trying to push that agenda. I think US will be a very innovative economy in the next 20 years also. And I think that's where India has to leverage some of those technology. India has to leverage the capital coming from the US. So I think we expect the trade to grow quite strong between two nations. But more important, what we see is a strategic relationship picking up much, much stronger because we live in a very difficult neighborhood. And I think India needs US very strongly from that perspective. In every aspect, India economy after GST will grow between 7.5 to 8+% next 20 years. And this is a great market opportunity for US companies to put in their flag and gain market share. That means they have to start thinking early about investing. They have to start thinking early about overcoming some of the ease of doing business issues, and also leveraging US government to push a better, either bilateral or multilateral between the two countries itself. So I think the market opportunity, which will vary from agriculture to defense, from pharma to technology for the US companies. And all of them have great opportunity in the next 20 years.
A third issue that really has been a sticking point in our bilateral relationship is that of totalization. We've had talks for so long and there has been virtually no progress. Do you see any hope of progress under the Trump administration on that?
No, and I agree with you. I think it's unfair. You have Indian IT workers leaving, $1 to $1.5 billion a year on social security contribution, and they get no benefit. I think it's unfair. I think what we have to do, it's a complex issue, working with the administration, working with the legislative side, and to put a game plan together to move things. Is it impossible? No. I mean, US has signed a totalization agreement with Korea and other countries. So I think we just need to...
So why is it that they don't want to sign it with India?
I think it's not they don't want to sign with India, because you have to change the law, you have to work with the administration. You need to have a lot of forces behind the scene pushing multiple buttons to make that happen. You have to work on the legislative side, which is both on the House side and the Senate side. You have to work with the administrative side. So you have to push multiple buttons same time to make this happen. And that's how the Koreans did it. And so we need to do that. And I think that's one of the key objectives we have at USIBC, to take this initiative and push forward.
The end of TPP should actually be good news for us, because we were never part of TPP and TPP would have been very unfair to us. How can we really capitalize on the opportunity that TPP is now a dead letter?
Well, I think one is I would not say it's the end of TPP.
Is it so?
Yeah, because this president has changed things,
Okay.
turned around.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one. Two is I think it's not India's interest early on to join TPP. India never indicated that.
We were not interested.
Not interested.
It was a very unilateral kind of...
Yeah. So I think from that perspective, does it give a chance for India to join TPP? I think the first step should be a baby step, which is joining APEC. Okay. And I think once you join APEC, you have to understand the whole Indian industry is not ready to compete on a global standard. Let's be very open about that. I think from every aspect, from a quality perspective, from a pricing perspective, if you open the Indian market so much that it will kill the local industry. And one of the key things this administration, Modi administration, is trying to do is make in India, to infuse that manufacturing into the Indian economy, to create jobs in the manufacturing perspective. And if you open that, and we are seeing that the Chinese are just taking away market share from, like in the electronics in India today. I mean, say every third thing you buy in India is coming from China.
The US also, isn't it?
Yeah, they did the same with the US also, but I think US has the strength financially to step up and focus more on the high-end manufacturing, focus on high-end innovation. I think India is still a growing economy, emerging economy, which can't take that risk itself. Today we have roughly 1 million new workers coming to the job market every month. Okay. And the current data, what we're seeing is only hiring 500,000, other 500,000 going into some kind of unemployment pool. I think we have to create an economy in India which creates those jobs. A growth story without job creation is unhealthy and socially it's not sustainable. So I think from that perspective, automation is a threat. If you look at today, a typical automobile in the US, only 3% of the cost is labor. Rest goes through other aspect. And in India, we have to look at things differently. Do we basically take some of the manufacturing jobs which are leaving China, going to Cambodia or into Laos and Thailand? We should figure out how to get them into India itself. I think those are the strategies we have to put together, because automation will have an impact on job creation globally. It's not just US, but India also.
My last question to you, Mukesh, really is that how do you see the global economy? The IMF is quite upbeat despite protectionist tendencies. What are the kind of dangers that you see in the global economy, the US economy and the Indian economy? And would these be in the economic arena or would they be more geopolitical?
I think from an economic growth perspective, India is the brightest spot. And I strongly believe India will keep on growing at that 7.5%, 8% plus percent next 20 years. So this is what I call the new China story, what happened in 1979 in China. So I think India has a long way to continue growing itself. Europe, if you look at, it seems to be turning around slowly. The whole, the Greece fiasco and all the stuff seems to be now settling down itself.
Despite Brexit.
I'm not worried about that. If you look at US, I'm going to say unemployment is at 4.5%. which means almost full employment. And if this administration pulls certain levers like deregulation, infrastructure and spending, lowering the taxes itself, putting a specialty to bring that $2.5 trillion cash lying outside, I think US economy will grow over 2% itself. And I think if the US grows, it becomes an engine for the rest of the global world also. So I think from that perspective, you're fine. I think if there are danger, there are more danger on geopolitical perspective. I think when I look at from a regional perspective, the South China Sea, accidental issue. What's happening between India and Pakistan, where Pakistan gets a little more aggressive because it's basically building tactical nuclear bombs. It feels that it can probably use them in a limited way. So I think that's the risk factor. Middle East, I think if US, Russia don't agree and something, again, an accident happens. So I think geopolitically things are much more precarious at this stage. As far as the economy goes, we're much more optimistic.
Thank you so much, Mukesh, for speaking to us and spending time with ET Now to explain the complexities, the challenges and the opportunities in the Indo-US bilateral relationship. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Maithili. In the meantime, if there's any other issue that you'd like to see discussed in this program, do write in to us at the mail ID you see at the bottom of your screen.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.